I knew something about psychology because I did some psychology at uni, and I worked in the NHS, and I worked alongside psychologists in management development and stuff like that. So I've had exposure to psychologists. So my expectation of a psychology service in general was around clinically trained, qualified, kind, compassionate people. This was the kind of individuals that I expected to meet. I also had some experience by proxy for this particular service, as I had a family member, husband and wife. He was the patient, didn't want the psychology service input, but his wife did. And so I actually asked to be referred into the service. I made that request. My husband was the patient, and it was, he was diagnosed the day after the first lockdown. So he would normally have had his psychology assessment in person. I would have accompanied him, and there would have been an opportunity for us to look at the holistic thing of us as a couple, not just as the patient. But because it was done on the phone, that initial process excluded me. So I actually rang up and said, please, can I access the service as the carer of a cancer patient? I knew that I needed it. I needed help because I may have been more self-sufficient in a non-pandemic time, but I couldn't have my family and my friends around me. They all had to be remotely on screens as well. And I was struggling psychologically. So I knew that I needed help. And I think, well, it's absolutely brilliant that the service is available to carers as well as the patient, because when someone's diagnosed with cancer, it's not solely the patient who suffers. And once we started the session, it was like the technology wasn't there. It was as real to me in terms of feeling that connection. And so I felt engaged the whole time. One of the important things for me was that it was a safe space, and it was a space for me, because we had a succession of professionals coming to the house, and they were all lovely, but they came to see my husband. But this was something that was for me, and that I was safe and I was protected. So if I wanted to cry, that was okay, but actually sometimes you laugh. And that's also okay, because you're not banned from laughing because you're married to someone who's dying. It's actually important to still be able to laugh. So the full gamut of emotions was not only allowed, but encouraged. And when you're feeling very threatened, not quite the right word, but that's what, because you've got this forthcoming death of your loved person hanging over you, it's that feeling of being allowed to do everything was incredibly important. Well, I think one of the most brilliant things for me, and again this comes down to wanting to speak to a psychologist, is that Claire was able to meet my needs. And I am a person who likes theories, who wants to understand principles behind things and thinking. And I wanted tools and techniques to help me deal with some of the real things that I had. For example, acute anxiety attacks. So I was getting myself more and more anxious. And so we talked through some specific techniques for learning how to manage that and to bring it under control. But looking at the underpinning of those. So the other thing that I found really important with sort of part of the session, Claire would signpost me to resources. So she told me about a book which I got on my Kindle and read, which was incredibly helpful. A book by Catherine Mannix about death and dying with the end in mind. And it was quite interesting because the first time I tried to read it, I had to stop after a chapter. But then I left it, and then when I went back, I read the whole lot. And that gave me some tools. And also provided some reassurance that in the majority of cases, hence with my anxiety, I would know that my husband was dying. And so by reading this book, I was able to reassure myself of how things might progress. And whilst it would be horrible to go through, it could be endured. And things could be done to make things better, you know. So signposting was one of the things. Discussions of, again, coming to my very particular way of thinking and being and needing to understand. Discussions of theories, and Claire, so we're virtual, but you know, Claire's got a sketch pad and she'll draw them out. So there was a model of loss and grief, Tonkin's model, which I found incredibly helpful. The idea that the black hole of my grief won't necessarily diminish over time, but what I want to do is expand my life so that proportionately it's less, but I'm not being expected to get over it and you know, get past it, because the size of the grief is just the same as it always was, and I can vouch for that. But it just, if you put and are able to include other things in your life, then you, as I say, can reduce the size of the grief proportionally.